Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire. Everything's on fire.
Welcome back, Heat Seekers. Happy Tuesday, Monday, whatever time you watch this. Hopefully it's happy for you. Week 1 is nearly in the books. Week 2 is upon us, and your IDP teams need some help. So we are here to help. We've got some waiver wire additions we want to throw your way. Hopefully they help you out. We also are going to throw in a couple of notable honorable mentions for team defenses for you redraft guys that are doing that. But before we do all that, make sure you get like, subscribe, hit the notification icon. Don't forget, comment below if you got questions. Kraig and I and the team will answer you and try to do our best to help you be successful in week 2. Hopefully it will be better than week 1. Kraig, how are you, my friend? And who are we talking about?
I'm doing all right. It's Monday the 13th, which means it's Garfield's least favorite day, but hopefully for the cat, he's doing all right. I haven't had any issues, knock on wood, myself.
I'll say lasagna's in his future, I'm sure.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow. But yeah, we're talking about IDP Waiver Wire Adds for you guys this week. You can find the article over on rotoheat.com as well, breaking it down by linebackers, defensive backs, and defensive linemen. First off the bat here, we have Anthony Walker of the Cleveland Browns. Walker, like all three of these guys really are going to be names that you have heard before, but kind of were in positions that were in flux. People really didn't know what to think, potentially reduced playing time and all that. Walker was going from the Colts to the Browns, but he ended up being the guy for the Browns as far as linebackers in week 1. He was at a 95% snap share, and the next closest was rookie Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo at 38%. He had a great week as far as IDP production. He had 8 solos and an assist, and next week brings the Texans, who, despite their high score and what I think may end up being sort of a red herring for how their season will go, but we'll find out. With that high scoring, but they ran a lot, and they're going to continue to run a lot, I think, with that stable of running backs and just sort of an unproven receiving core with a lot of rookies and younger players. So having that high upside as far as the guy in the middle at the linebacker behind that great defensive line for the Browns, he's our first guy on the list.
And he's a smart ad. You know, when you think about what they're rushing off the edge with Garrett and Clowney, and the line itself, I mean, it funnels people up the middle. I mean, it really does kind of push people towards Walker. So it should be a good addition, and he looked good in this defense. So I absolutely 100% agree. He's a guy that you should try to get ownership in. And, you know, and like I said in the article, he's not owned very much anywhere. So he's definitely somebody that you should be able to acquire for a fairly small amount of free agent money, I would think.
Yep, and the next guy actually is kind of conversely the highest owned guy that we have on the list. You can see the ownership percentages on Sleeper and Yahoo for all these guys, but it's still only 26%, which is a quarter of the league's about on Yahoo. Is Jordan Hicks. Jordan Hicks we know from the Philadelphia Eagles and prior years with the Arizona Cardinals here. There had been a lot of scuttlebutt about him being pushed to a reserve role or being traded or cut in the preseason. With rookie Zaven Collins taking over. However, that just didn't end up being the case in week 1. Hicks played 95% of the snaps, which was the most of any of the 3 sort of main inside guys they have, with Isaiah Simmons being the other. Simmons, second-year linebacker, was safe. He had a 91% snap share, so it's sort of him and Hicks were the 2 guys here. And Hicks didn't have a huge stat line for you, but what we're looking at here is next week they bring on the Vikings, and the Vikings gave up a lot of fantasy points to linebackers last week, and we know that they are going to continue to try to focus on running the ball, especially with not really being able to pass block that great for Kirk Cousins. So I think Hicks's ownership should be higher, given that it looks like he's going to be playing more than people had anticipated, and he sort of is a proven commodity. I'm not saying you want to start him necessarily, but definitely a guy that should be on someone's bench in your leagues.
Yeah, and he really should give you a decent amount of production. I mean, this defense, I know we've mentioned that we like the trajectory of them, and they were facing a good offense. Tennessee is no slouch, and they were all over the field, and a lot of action was going on, and a lot of good fantasy production was able to receive here. You know, Isaiah Simmons came up with an interception and looked good. I mean, there's just a lot of guys in this defense that have potential to be relevant, and this is a great pickup if you can get a guy like this, because people are, no pun intended, sleeping on him. So I would agree that Hicks is a guy that you should want to own. Who is our third linebacker we want to talk about?
Our last linebacker is the much maligned past few years, Christian Kirksey, now on the Houston Texans. 2016, 2017, he had great years, over 130 combined tackles, both years with the Browns, but the past 3 years, most he played was 11 games, and that was last year with the Packers. He was in single digits the 2 years before due to injuries. Packers got rid of him, and even he had been phased out on that team last year. So he went on a one-year deal to the Texans, played 100% of the snaps next to Cunningham. It looks like those are going to be the two main guys on the inside for him. And clearly, they are not going just the complete tank route that everyone thought. That it's a team of veterans, sort of like when they rebuilt the Patriots. When Belichick got there, and that's sort of where the front office comes from, they got rid of a lot of guys and just bring in cheap veterans to try to have a stable base to incorporate young guys into. And it kind of seems like they're doing the same thing here. Kirksey had 5 solos and assists, 2 tackles for a loss, 2 passes defended, and an interception. And like I said in the article, he's not going to do that each week, but a linebacker playing 100% of the snaps on a defense that'll probably one way or the other be on the field a lot is going to be a valuable guy to have. And I think people just kind of gave up on him by and large, as in, even sort of your mid-sized leagues, he really isn't rostered right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and injuries and ineffectiveness for the last couple seasons really hurt him, but he was a promising young talent when, early on. So I definitely am absolutely on board with this addition. If you can get him, do so. He should be on the field. Like you said, that defense is going to be on the field. I know they face Jacksonville, but they're not facing Jacksonville every week. They do have a fairly easy schedule, facing Jacksonville twice, facing the Colts, who are still trying to get their identity back on offense. Tennessee, which just let Arizona kind of steal their lunch. I mean, there's a lot to like about a guy like Kirksey. So I'm on board with that as well. Moving over to the defensive backs, who we got?
Yeah, the first guy is someone you're not going to have available, or at least I would be surprised, and even an average-sized dynasty league. But redraft leagues, he probably is more available just based on not having anything happen for much of last year. It's Kyle Duggar, safety for the New England Patriots. He was a second-round pick last year, and we know just a lot of rookies last year kind of got lost and not a lot happened. And Belichick, doesn't always like to, at least, maybe before this year, throw rookies into the fire unless he has to. He played 93% of the defensive snaps, and he played all over the board. He had 27 coverage snaps. He had over half of his total snaps were in the box, or like in that hybrid role that we saw Adrian Phillips in a lot last year. He's just a really versatile guy in the secondary that they can use all over in a number of different ways, and he was productive. He ended up with 6 solos and assist and a tackle for a loss. With that high workload coming that I foresee based on just how they used their secondary and sort of guys in the Duggar role previously, along with his athleticism. If you can find him free in a league anywhere, or even if you're using free agent acquisition bucks, which most leagues do, he's worth throwing money at. Again, probably more of a redraft thing because I'm not in any IDP dynasty leagues where he's available.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody's watched the Monday show for any length of time, this is a guy that you had talked up significantly his rookie season, and we all were on board with him.
Yeah.
I think you were the most strongest opinion for him, but he's definitely fit in that defense. And, schematically, like this is almost a perfect fit for him. And it was hard to see at first, but now that you're starting to see what they're doing with him on the field, I mean, this is an awesome talent. And this kid is going to continue to get, better as he gets more comfortable reading what the offenses are doing and putting himself in a position to make plays. I love the addition, and I think he's going to pay big dividends even this year moving forward.
Second guy we got here, sort of a cornerback hybrid safety. It's all over the board. If you look at 5 different sites, you're probably going to find 3 different designations with one cornerback, one safety, and then one you can play both. But it's Legitaria Sneed of the Chiefs. He's a guy that I had talked up in an article you can find a link to in the article for waivers this week over on rotoheat.com. He is a guy that played probably more than he is going to consistently just because Honey Badger Tyrann Mathieu was out. But he played a lot last year as a rookie. He played a lot at the start of the year, did really well. He got hurt and was out for most of the year, came back at the end of the year and just did really well for him even in the playoffs. So they clearly have high hopes for him. He was a 4th-round pick out of Louisiana Tech last year. And he played 100% of the snaps again. Now, am I expecting that each week once Tyrann Mathieu returns? No, I don't. But because he has that versatility to play safety, to play cornerback, just play over the field and have a nose for, finding that ball carrier, I think he will be on the field a lot for him. And he's someone that there's a lot of IDP people just don't even pay attention to. He had 7 solos this week, which tied him for a team high. I loved him coming into this year, and it was really nice to see him perform well. So he's one of our guys for this week too.
Yeah, he's got that thing you love, scheme versatility. It seemed as though against Cleveland they were moving him all over the formation, like you said, mostly because Tyrann Mathieu was sidelined, but he put himself in position to be successful and looked good on the field. It looked like everything had picked up where it left off for him, as we've seen him kind of develop a little bit over the last couple seasons. So I'm definitely on board with this guy. I think he's a fun addition. We liked him. I don't remember if we talked specifically about him, when he was coming out of college, but as he's gotten into the league, this is an interesting defense to see him be a part of because he can learn from a guy like Tyrann Mathieu. And it was interesting to see him develop. And then last week was this week, week 1 was a bit of a coming out party for him. So absolutely on board with him. Probably more so on board with your third choice just because of the defense that he's in. But who's the next guy up we're going to talk about?
Yeah, so if you didn't pay attention to the article last year, we kind of try to, group these guys by overall position group, but we want to kind of split it up, not just have 3 safeties because some of you are playing in deeper leagues or leagues that require defensive tackles or cornerbacks. So we're always going to throw at least 1 cornerback, 1 defensive tackle in there for you guys for those leagues that are requiring those. This is a guy that received some hype towards the end of last year, especially if you pay attention to the Buffalo Bills community. Fantasy-wise, it didn't really pop up as much, but Taryn Johnson of the Buffalo Bills cornerback. So he was the slot guy for him. He played a heck of a lot for him this week, too, when they faced the Pittsburgh Steelers. And being one of the cornerbacks not named Tre'Davious White is really good for fantasy production because White is one of those cornerbacks that teams do openly try to avoid. He ended up having 7 solos and 2 pass deflections, and they're coming up facing the Miami Dolphins, who are looking to throw the ball a lot. You can tell in a low-scoring game, Tua was throwing the ball around, and I think Johnson had kind of cemented himself as one of those guys that you can certainly play and should be grabbing in cornerback-required leagues, but I could see him being fantasy relevant in deeper, just flat defensive back leagues if you're playing, 3 of them, or, if you have a lot of linebacker spots and you want to throw a defensive back in at the flex. He's a physical guy, and he's not afraid of tackling, which you love to see from a cornerback.
Well, and you said it perfectly. He's the nickel back on a team that has Tre'Davious White, so he's going to get targeted a bunch. I mean, him and Levi Wallace will get a fair amount of targets, but that nickelback position is a fun one for fantasy, and I would love to see somebody kind of build out analytics based on how much more value the nickelback has than any other cornerback position fantasy-wise on a team, because it seems like we always talk about the nickelback being the most valuable corner on a team, or sometimes the guy who's opposite a shutdown corner. I get that, but nickelback always seems to be very highly talked about. Think of the Mike Hiltons of the world being against Pittsburgh. But Buffalo's going to be facing teams that are going to be doing 3 and 4 wides on a regular basis, especially in the division they're in, or potentially going to be facing that. So a guy like Johnson will be on the field a significant amount of time. So I absolutely love buying a guy like this because you won't have to spend anything at all on him, and he should return you a nice little chunk of investment moving forward. All right, so moving on to defensive line. Who are we targeting on the defensive line?
Yeah, so this one, honestly, this was a little bit harder than I anticipated for week 1 because there just weren't a ton of defensive linemen that had big weeks, and that'll depend, of course, on your scoring. But if you're looking at just even flat tackle rates, so that's one of the things that we try to look at if you're looking for consistency, all players across the same position, like who stood out for the week in fantasy football. And I tell you, the highest that I saw as far as solo tackles for any defensive lineman, there were a few guys that had 5, which just seems low. Usually you have, a couple of those guys that get a higher number than that. But we had, Simmons and Buckner were the 2 guys that had 5, which are big names that should be owned, especially if you play in a defensive tackle league. But I'd argue just any league, those guys should be owned by someone. So we had to sort of dig a little deeper here and try to find guys. And I found 3 of them that I liked. The first one was Rasheem Green for the Seattle Seahawks. He was the highest as far as snap share defensive lineman for Seattle, and you could tell Seattle, at least at the start of the year again here, sort of like last year, we'll see if it continues. As they say, they're going to let Russ cook, perhaps, which will lead to more opportunity for their defense to, be out there and rushing the passer for teams trying to catch up to them, sort of like what happened this week. He had a really nice week. Again, it was a 70% snap share, 3 solos and assists, 2 pass deflections, tackle for a loss, and a sack. And they're going to be facing the Tennessee Titans coming up here, who we saw have all sorts of trouble defending the pass rushers. I don't think it'll be exactly the same. I'm not expecting a complete repeat, but being sort of the guy at the moment as far as the pass rushers and being productive, he's a nice add. It's probably more of a deeper league thing, but if you have room and you want to just stash him on your bench and see if he continues this, I liked him. I think he showed really well for him this week, and they certainly need to find something on that defensive line for Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, they've tried plenty of things, getting free agents and trading for guys and drafting first-round picks, and they just haven't. It feels like it's been so long since they traded for Cliff Averill, who was probably one of the last best defensive ends that they had on the team.
Yeah,
and for the Super Bowl team years ago. But this defense, if you can find an edge rusher that has good bend and good speed and get around there and actually be successful winning battles, you get that kind of production like Green had this week. And he was going against a good offensive line. The Colts are not a bad offensive line. I know they had guys that were hurt, but Green is a guy that should potentially continue to develop in this defensive scheme because he's still young. I think he was like a 2018 or 2019 like kind of day 2 pick. I don't remember exactly when.
He's a third rounder out of USC in 18. Yeah,
day 2 pick. So he's a guy that I think it's a calculated risk that you shouldn't have to spend much to get. That you just see what happens. If this is an anomaly, okay, but this may not be because he's looked better than everything else they've trotted out so far.
Yeah, they traded for anything like Alden Smith, who clearly ran into more trouble. They had signed him. Dunlop barely did anything with them. You talked about someone that they went and got via trade. I think they had traded with the Bengals to get him last year. It really is just a mess. So,
it is.
Next one, talk about another mess. The Jets' defensive line. They had high hopes for this. They had one loss and Carl get hurt. They went on trade for another Shaq who didn't do a whole lot for him. But this is a guy that they had signed in John Franklin Meyers. He had been with the Rams for a couple of years, and they sent him to a 4-year deal. Wasn't a lot of money, but clearly they had interest in him, and he's been a starter for them. They had that as the plan, and it did come to fruition. And he was on the field the most for the Jets as far as defensive linemen at a 69% snap share, just slightly above a Quinnen Williams, who, of course, is the guy on that defensive line, even with Lawson. Williams was the main guy. But Myers had a nice – Franklin Myers had a nice game, 2 solos and assists, 2 tackles for a loss and a sack, which is nice production from a defensive lineman when you consider that 5 solo tackles was the most that anyone had. Patriots are the next on board, and they did not give up a sack that I saw, but they did allow quite a few quarterback hits on Mac Jones, and, of course, playing out against a rookie. They're probably going to be trying to run the ball like they did this past week, which will open up some tackle opportunities, and I don't think they're going to leave Mac Jones completely clean for the season, and Salah's going to want to make his impact going against Bill Belichick for the first time as a head coach. So he's a guy that I think may end up being their best sort of defensive end for this year, given just kind of blah mess that they're working with at the moment. And he's free in basically every league.
Well, yeah, and he came from the Rams, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So he was kind of overshadowed by, some elite defensive line play there. So he's a name that slipped out and they got for a discount price that could return a much better value. So absolutely on board with it. If you need a defensive line help, this would be a great spot to go after a guy like this who's super cheap or free, I should say. All right, who's our last one on the board? Who are we talking about?
Last one is defensive tackle, because like I said, we're going to be trying to give you one of those each week. And this guy I was surprised to see, not really owned in leagues either. Larry Ogunjobi, he's a name that you guys have heard before if you've been playing IDP for a while. He had really nice seasons in 2018, 2019, which I believe were his second and third years in the league. At that time with the Cleveland Browns, he moved within the division. He is now on the Cincinnati Bengals with what ended up being a nice we'll see if it's because of that Vikings mess offensive line or just if they're going to be a feisty sort of defensive line this year, like we're hoping they get to be. He had a 71% snap share, which is the highest of the defensive tackle or nose tackle position on that team. Of course, he has guys that are going to be focused on Jadeveon Clowney looking for a new contract after this year, and the amazing Myles Garrett being the defensive ends. They're going to have offenses paying attention to him. And Ogunjobi in his own right had been a really good player. He just sort of had a blah year, the past year. I think he had been hurt, in and out of lineups. But he had 4 solos, 2 assists, 2 tackles for a loss, and a sack. Jeez, my mind is wrong. Scratch that. I was talking about the Browns. It's been one of those days. Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson are the guys on the Bengals. So, yes, we're talking about the Bengals as the team you actually want to care about. And that is the team that Ogunjobi is on. Not as great as Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. Next time, just cut me off. Right?
I was just enjoying the ride, man. I was having fun watching you do your thing.
But Hubbard and Hendrickson, so Hubbard we have liked here for a while on Roto Heat. He's a guy that I think is going to bounce back this year. And Trey Hendrickson, we're going to have to see if he was real last year and what he gave that one really good year in the Saints or not. But clearly, those were the guys being focused on, and Ogunjobi just had a day last week. This past week, week 1 in the NFL. Yes, I still need sleep from the baby. But the point is, this is the kind of guy that is free in a lot of leagues, and if you require an interior lineman or that defensive tackle specific, he's a great guy. I mean, people were having hopes of him being, a perennial top 10 guy after those 2 really good years. And, he kind of fell off and people forgot about him. So this is the kind of guy, Dynasty, if you can swoop in, hang on to him. He probably is more owned in Dynasty leagues, but in redraft leagues with those other people on that line and DJ Reader, sort of the other main tackle there, there's people that you're going to have to pay attention to across it. And a guy like Ogunjobi going against a bad defense, offensive line, which the Bears are, who they play this next week, it could be really interesting for him again.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that Chicago's offensive line is not great. Definitely not top half of the league for sure. And Ogunjobi's a fun guy to watch because when he gets an opportunity, he does a good job. I mean, I know he was overshadowed in Cleveland, and he's even being overshadowed now like guys like DJ Reader and Sam Hubbard. So go after him, roster him if you need the help, especially if you're in a defensive tackle specific situation. Most likely in dynasty formats, he's probably rostered a little bit more. So the numbers you're seeing on our articles on Roto Heater are more I don't say
probably
necessarily
redraft.
But more redraft centric. But if he's available, definitely feel good about rostering him.
And he's young. I mean, he's 27 on a 1-year deal. He's looking to prove himself and get a larger contract coming up. And, that's the sort of stuff sometimes we need to think into this. He's not a guy that just got paid a ton of money. He's going to come out great out of the gates and just like, oh, well, I got paid. Mm-hmm. We know he has talent. We know he wants to get that, big contract coming up here. And clearly he's, putting an effort in here to prove himself, and they're getting him on the field. So it's a great combination.
Absolutely. So thank you guys for hanging out with us. Those were our week 2 waiver wire ads. These videos will drop typically probably Monday at some point throughout the day whenever Kraig and I get a chance to hook up and work on them. So be on the lookout. If you haven't, like I said, like, subscribe, do all those things I tell you every time you see me on YouTube. And that's it, right? Oh, no, we do got to do some honorable mention defensive special teams for you. True defensive special teams, guys. If you watch this week, there were some fun ones. I mean, the Saints made Aaron Rodgers look normal, which was fun. That would be a defense that I think is interesting to keep an eye on, but I don't know that I'm jumping all over yet. Kraig, what's a defense that you would target if you were trying to look to stream a defense this week? Who's your favorite?
Streaming, so you got to kind of cut out the ones that are going to be highly owned, like the Rams are going to be owned, the Ravens are going to be owned, stuff like that. And then you kind of got to look ahead into the week. Honestly, I think the Saints are an interesting one after what they did against the Packers. And like they talked on with our buddies Front Yard Fantasy about, is it conspiracy that Aaron Rodgers is just trying to tank to kill the Packers? Boy, I'd love for that to be true. That would be just fun for real life if that were the case. Unfortunately, I don't think it is. But they're going against a Panthers team that just wasn't what I would call impressive. I expected more out of them against the Jets, and I know the Jets have a defensive-minded head coach. It's going to be the first game they're revved up, ready to play for him. But if they were able to do that against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers offense, I really like them going against the Panthers here. And they just paid – I always screw these up. I think it's Marshawn Lattimore because Marcus was the running back, right?
Right, yeah.
I don't know why I can never get those two right. But he just got paid, so he's going to be sticking around there, and maybe he's going to come back and play for him now, which would only improve it. And then another one that, I think got slept on a little bit that I would look at possibly playing is that Seahawks one. If you're looking for someone truly that's probably on the waivers, because the Seahawks, they have Jamal Adams, which is great. They have Wagner. And then there's a whole lot of just question marks on that defense. But they showed up, and they showed that they can get you fantasy points. So those are the two just glancing over it that I'd have interest in. What about you?
I would also, on top of that, obviously the Saints are a perfect streaming option, but I would throw the Cardinals on there. I don't think they're a defense that people are starting heavily that I'm aware of. In any of the leagues that I'm in with defense special teams, they were on waivers. So Cardinals would be one if they are available. I would be perfectly fine with that because they've got the Vikings this week, and that's a good matchup. So especially with a defense that's as fast and athletic as theirs. So there's 3 defense special teams. If you need them, enjoy. If you have questions, like I said, drop them in the comments below. Our Twitter handles are always here, so you can send us some DMs. Don't forget Tuesday night to jump in and talk with Kraig and the IDP guys as they have the conversation. It's actually Gridiron, right? It's Gridiron Ratings.
Gridiron Ratings, yep.
They are IDP guys, but they're not the IDP guys because
Correct.
there are some of those as well. So make sure you jump in the chat and show some love to Kraig and the guys. We obviously will be doing our Dynasty chat as well, so you can jump over there and have some conversations with both of us. Thank you guys as always, Kraig. Pleasure is all mine, my friend. Thank you for hanging out with me, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Yep, good to see you. Later.